Hi, my name is Rodolfo. I'm a researcher in fluid dynamics and physics, and I'm also a member of the CibCom collective. And CibCom is a Spanish-speaking collective. We have members in Spain, but also some in Latin America. And we are dedicated to, investigating the possibilities of democratic planning and of reviving the debate around planning, which we think has been lost largely in the wake of the collapse of the USSR and the acceptance of much of the left of the market. So CibCom, we have a website, cibcom.org, we have a Twitter account, we have an Instagram account, and it's, like I said, mainly Spanish-based, but we're having more and more content in English because it looks like people are interested in our work outside of the Spanish-speaking globe. So yeah, if you go to our Twitter or you go to our webpage, you can find links. So thanks for inviting me. Can you hear me at the back? My name is Rodolfo. I'm a member of CibCom, which is short for cyber communism. It's a group that collective, kind of behaves like a think tank that got started a few years ago, and I joined it last year. Some of you might know me. I helped run Customer magazine when I lived in the US, and somebody already said my voice was somewhat familiar. Otherwise, I moved back to Spain, where I'm originally from, last year, and I joined this collective. And it's basically, the structure, it's more like a think tank where there's a diversity of opinion. We are very politically unbounded. We have anarchists, Trotskyists, all kinds of people. But our main, let's say, uniting thread is the belief in economic planning, right? So that's what I'm going to talk about today, and these things are more representative of the group, even if sometimes I'll add a few things here and there. And these are kind of standardized from the group, so that's why I didn't introduce myself, but introduce the group more, okay? So this is probably something that I don't need to spend much time on. Like after the Great Recession in 2008, we are seeing that capitalism doesn't really work very well. We have to replace it with something else. It simultaneously generates idle means of production, unemployed population, unmet social needs, and during its crisis it becomes more serious. And in a way, our proposal, democratic economic planning, is antithesis of what capitalism means. So what did Marx say about capitalism? He didn't say it was very good. On the other hand, he said something like, it prevents a rational democratic control of society. It's based on the exploitation of human labor, but maybe another thing is it reproduces itself in a way that's very uneven and turbulent. It's prone to crises, right? The crisis is an integral part of capitalism, and it's also necessary for capitalism. You need to destroy the enterprises that are not profitable so you get new enterprises. This whole cycle of creative destruction, that's one of the, let's say, more powerful parts of capitalism. They're always renewing itself. You have new businesses always coming up because the old is being destroyed, but at the same time the workers suffer this and they get unemployed, capital moves around, labor doesn't move that much. In my case, I moved from Spain to the UK, to the Netherlands, to the US, back to Spain, just following a job, right? It's not something we'd all like to do. And we want to build a future society that overcomes the capitalist mode of production. We understand this as a project which will emancipate us, and we will govern ourselves based on the collective control of the global productive process. So what does this mean? How do we replace capitalism? So there's basically, if you start to think about it, there's 4 ways that people answer how to replace capitalism. It's good to say you're anti-capitalist. Okay, what does anti-capitalist mean? It means I'm against capitalism. Okay, but what are we proposing? How do you want to replace capitalism? And usually there's like 4 typical answers that are said. First, post-capitalism is already developing. It's impossible or unnecessary to come up with a proposal. You just have to have faith in the goodwill of people. Or we have a more developed and fleshed out proposals. So the first answer is more the idea that, in some places technology is leading us to a post-capital society. Necessary human labor, expansion of intellectual labor. It's already leading us to a society that's no longer capitalist. This is mainly influenced by Italian theorists. Negri, Hart are the 2 more prominent people. And because we are already fading out from capitalism, this is all the kind of things you see, like, this is feudal capitalism, or this is techno-capitalism, platform capitalism, neocapitalism. So eventually capitalism, we just have to follow the trend to the end. But on the other hand, if you actually look at what's happening, human labor hasn't been reducing globally. It's still necessary. Most of us in the places of global north, we do have a different lifestyle than our grandfathers, but if you go to the global south, the working class is actually increasing People still have relatively shitty jobs in the sense they're still doing mining work, they're still doing overexploited agricultural work, working in a sweatshop. So technological development doesn't seek to reduce human labor, it seeks to make profits, right? If you're a working minimum job, there's always this picture that says like, oh, if you raise a minimum job, McDonald's workers will be automated. Like, well, maybe we should automate them. You know, it doesn't make sense that you threaten us with unemployment instead of having a machine do a really shitty job for us, right? The other thing we say is like proposals are not really needed or impossible. So even coming from Marx, who rejected the idea of writing recipes for the future, you always have this idea workers will figure out themselves, we need to focus on the current struggle. It's impossible to anticipate what the future looks like. But you know, you can't really say that to someone in the streets. Like we call this the insulin problem. If my aunt asks me, where will I get my insulin from if you guys get to rule the country? I need to give her a solution, right? I don't need to tell her, we'll figure it out. Like, well, I'm gonna die and we'll figure it out, right? I'm gonna have an overdose. So we do need some sort of horizon. And this also goes against this idea, you know, you have the faith of the goodwill of people. This is a kind of infamous tweet, like, how will glasses distribution work under anarchism? Well, we'll just find a way of someone who likes making glasses and he'll make them for everyone. Like, let's be serious about this. You know, modern production is incredibly complex. We rely on extremely developed supply chains, you know. If I were to take a blueprint of a microchip back to Roman Empire, they wouldn't know how to build it because they don't know where the materials come from, right? It's not like you can separate the deployment of the supply chains from the development of new technology. And then, so we enter what you say are more fleshed out and detailed proposals. And in this category, we like to put things like historical examples, USSR, other planned economies, you know, market socialism, Parecon, and I think, well, Tim will present later another proposal which overlaps quite a bit with ours. So the idea is you need to actually have some sort of proposal. Even if you can't implement it tomorrow, you need to at least have an idea of what you want to do, right? So what we propose is economic planning through something we call cybercommunism, which is, you know, cibercomunismo, CibCom, that's where our name comes from. And we want to, so what we propose is to consciously and democratically regulate social production and social reproduction so we can achieve emancipation. What does the cyber bit mean? So cybernetics, it's a science developed during World War II, and it slowly became into many fields. And it's basically defined as science of information and control. So a way of thinking about this is we use cybernetics to study complex systems that obtain information from their environment, they process it, and they make decisions based on it. So this is something as simple as a thermostat, which is obviously not working here because we're all very warm, but it also would be something like us. You know, I look at the environment, I look at you all, I looked at how bored you are or not, and then I decide to keep on speaking. But also the economy, you know, economy is in a way also a system that looks at how people relate to each other. And the market is a way of solving, say, the problem of social metabolism. It helps people relate to each other. You know, if we want to defeat capitalism, we have to understand why it's such a powerful mechanism. Such a powerful mechanism because we all relate to each other through euros. You know, I got a beer from there, I'll pay someone. But a beer comes from water from somewhere, wheat from somewhere, a glass bottle from somewhere. It's all condensed and reduced as a price, okay? So that's both a very powerful and a very damaging thing. But you have to think about that if we want to think about why capitalism has basically penetrated the entire world, right? It's done it at the bayonet or with a weapon, with a gun, but it's also done it because it's convenient. I moved from the US to Europe last year, and somehow I sold my bed, I sold my computer, I sold all these things for money. I took the money across the ocean and I bought these things again, right? If you think about it, it's like, it's a wonderful thing. You know, I was able to get rid of everything I owned, switch it to this number, and then use that number to buy different things I needed in another place. If we want to build a new society, we have to think, why is that powerful? How can we replace that, you know? And that's why I say we need a serious proposal to think about this, you know? So in our sense, the cyber adds to communism, the fact that, you know, you're looking at the foundations of bourgeois institutions through information and control lenses, and you start thinking about questions like, what does make your market stable? What makes capitalism unstable? Why do you need this crisis? Why is capitalism still stable? Why, after the 20th final crisis of capitalism, we're still here, you know? And also thinking about, what kind of alternative institutions should we build? Do we want a council system? Do we want a council-type pyramid of elected people? Do we want direct democracy? Do we want sortition? Do we want referenda? What about parliaments? Do parliaments dilute the will of the people? Do they actually help you communicate to each other? All these things are things we think about in our association. So taking a step, taking a different approach now, so I want to talk a bit about what we think about capitalism and planning, right? So that's a basically introduction to cybernetics and why I think is useful. But to say the calculation problem is one of our biggest enemies, in the sense that, the calculation problem, for those of you who might not be familiar, is this idea that says, like, how can you compare things? This is how I was saying, how do I know my bed when I sold it was worth $400 and, a bottle of beer is worth $150 or it's worth whatever, How do you collapse all that information into a single metric? And the usual argument against socialism is that you can't do that. You can't, if you get rid of market, you cannot really plan an economy. You can't have efficiency because people always need to exchange things. So then if we want to defeat this idea, if we want to do better, how do we do it? Well, we need to have something that has transparent access to all economic information. We need to build something that can immediately react to new citizen needs without the mediation of profits. And we need to have the foresight to perform long-term economic calculations, right? And before I introduce our vision, it's worth noting that some people have had other visions for this transitional period. The two main ones have been, this what we call the statalism of means of production, USSR or most of the Eastern Bloc. And the problem there, we believe that, it was that because the plans were kind of rigid, there were not enough information was taken from people. You can't just take over means of production. You need to somehow be able to democratize information too. If you don't do that, you'll run into problems. Why did the USSR have a black market? Because it wasn't satisfying all the needs of the people. You have black markets. You have things going on. When you can't regulate society, society finds a way to work at its margins, right? And sometimes you have places like North Korea. North Korea, for example, is able to build nuclear weapons, but it's still dependent on food aid from outside. If you have a plan that's too rigid, you don't develop the necessary complexity, necessary variety of jobs. On the other hand, things like market socialism, biggest example is Yugoslavia, where enterprises are socially owned, controlled by the workers. You still have markets, but productive units tend to be very isolated. You still have recoveries of profit motive. If you study Yugoslavia, we find that you have inequality. You have reproducing a lot of features of capitalism because a market is not a neutral mechanism. It tends to favor those who are already rich. So, developing a bit more like on this idea, we tend to take a very strong position against market views of socialism because we believe markets are not neutral. Like I said, they're a chaotic system. They pit everybody against each other. They make everybody be able to exchange with each other, but at the same time, it always favors those who have more. And even under socialism, even if you collectively own the production, you cannot leave circulation alone. You need to have a plan for both. And in this field, we focus on econophysics, which is a branch of the physics, statistical mechanics. It dedicates to explore markets, to model them. I'm not talking about this here. Agatha forbade me from putting equations on these slides. But if you're interested in knowing more, you can ask me for references. But here's a few. I really like Laws of Chaos and How Labor Powers a Global Economy. There's also this book, Classical Econophysics. And these are other references we usually like. But anyway, I'll show this again at the end of the presentation. So our proposal is basically based on the proposal in Towards a New Socialism by Cockshott and Cottrell, in case any of you are familiar with those words. And we intend to say, the problem of the calculation problem that's always thrown at Marxists, it said, you need a universal accounting mechanism. So we propose that instead of using money, we remunerate people based on how much they work. If you work 8 hours, you get 8 hours worth of good. If you work 40 hours, you get 40 hours worth of good. And at the same time, we calculate, let's say, wages, because they're not really wages, based on this. You also control planning. You have a very strong mechanism for making decisions democratically on developed objectives. You have mechanisms for building real-time plans, 5-year plans, but also real-time plans and all these things. And in this way, we want to, let's say, design systems that are superior to capitalism on two planes. economically, they will have more capacity for development of productive forces. They'll be more efficient. They'll be able to provide everybody with, a house and food. And they'll also be more democratic. They'll allow people to decide what's being made. Sometimes all this thing of planned obsolescence, right? You buy a light bulb, it breaks in 2 years. This wouldn't happen if your society was democratically controlled. No one likes this except the guys who sell you the light bulbs, right? And the common objection we come against is the fact that, labor vouchers, they're not money. And in the transitional period, you always need a plan, right? Like I said, you need a recipe for what happens just after you start reforming the economy, what happens after you take power. And we believe that labor vouchers are they're not money because, if you have a working hour pricing, it allows us to have a universal pricing. It allows us to get rid of a lot of inequalities. At the same time, the social product is a quantity of work, so we will try to optimize to make people work less. And it's very democratic. Everybody can put in the same amount of work. Of course, there will be exceptions for those who can't work, but it's a way that we can find to coordinate people, compare costs, and at the same time allow for a more fair and universal pricing. Here's the long table, the main differences, but I'll just skip it, and if you're interested more, I'll give you references later. And we usually got told that, you're just reinventing market socialism, this is just money. Well, the idea is we prevent this from becoming money, because money is not just what you get paid. It's something, like I said, it's universal equivalent. Everything is worth something. Well, if you make your vouchers, your labor non-transferable, and you make them only obtainable by working, you take out of the picture, investments, rent, gambling, whatever. You make it redeemable when you use it, something like a train ticket. You make it everyone being paid the same. And they are only able to be used to acquire goods which have been produced by the plan. Basically, again, like a flight ticket, it has your name and you can change it for a flight. It's not money. Even you try to sell, you need to pay money to change your name, etc., etc. Then you prevent this from becoming money. And for the planning side, we would like to think of a central planning office, which is in symbiosis with society, not like something hidden away, but a place where knowledge and information is shared, it's integrated, and not everything is decided there. It's a place where, let's say, high-level suggestions are made, but a lot of the plans must be endorsed before the population, right? There's problems which are political. If we need to build a new dam to make sure, or we need to build even a new road through a forest, it will save people commuting time, but at the same time it will destroy a forest, right? That's not a calculation problem, that's a political problem, right? That's the kind of thing that should be voted on by the people. So in the sense, we would think about 3 types of plans, what we call strategic. Say you want to increase the use of public transport by 10%. Then you look at the macroeconomics. How do you secure the budget to produce trains, trams, where are we getting the money to make the train from? And then detail, like how many trains must we make, who is making them, how many wheels, where are we making the wheels, where are we getting the rubber for the wheels from? So this is the idea of you have multi-levels, and let's say number 1 is strategic. Those are the ones that will go before the people to be voted, but then as you go down, they will be decided more and more locally. So in general, designing these plans will involve a lot of knowledge. You need to know the industrial processes that we have under our command. We need to know what it takes to produce a certain amount of something. We need to accurately calculate the inputs. Again, we propose to calculate them with working hours subject to ecological limits. And we need to adjust the method to do it the most efficient way, an optimization problem. But all these separate problems are things we think about but are largely solved. So these are a few diagrams. For example, to make beer, you need, this is in Spanish, my bad, but this is to make cerveza, which if any of you have traveled to Spain, you at least know one word, I'm sure. Every Dutch person I know knows that word. You need electricity to make flour, you need cereal to make flour, and then you have water, right? And this is something another mechanism, say you're overproducing or you're underproducing, you might temporarily price things less than their value just to get rid of them, or you might price things more to adjust them, but with the idea that, even if you add a few tweaks here and there, you don't recover the market because you're very careful just to add 1 or 2 tweaks here and there. And of course, this is an ongoing area of research, but I'd like to, stressed because we usually get called like, you guys want a computer to govern us. Like, no, wait, we are not cogs in the plan. We make the plans ourselves, we design, we direct, and we execute them. We are not subject to the algorithm. The algorithm helps us get there, but we are not subject, it's not an algorithmocratic solution, which is a word I think we made up one time, but anyway. So, well, I've been talking for how long? 20 minutes. Okay, then that's good. So then we have a few comments more, so you see what like I said, we also look at past experiences, what we try to learn from. So one experience that's very common is the commune. Like, communities have long been able to effectively manage a local economy. But on a small scale, certain things are possible because there's an efficient information flow that's well defined, right? If we want to build a large-scale planning, large-scale democracy, this is the kind of things we look at in our association. We say, okay, communes, why do they work? Because they're small-scale. Everybody knows each other, or everybody knows to exchange information. That's how you make this work. How do you look at this, transpose it to a large scale? We look at the USSR, and you say, like, okay, was in many ways a positive achievement. There's two obstacles, not enough computing power for planning at the time, and the blockade, political institutional. It wasn't just computers that were not there. The people, the planners preferred to not give up the power they had when designing certain objectives. In the USSR, this was resolved through market reforms that culminated in perestroika, eventually the collapse of the USSR. But the problem was there. And there was a solution for it, an alternative pathway that was never taken. If you've heard about this OGAS, basically in the 1960s, there were people saying, like, maybe we should use this decentralized network to control the economy. And this guy, Viktor Grushkov, had a very long proposal on this. And the project was unfortunately left aside because people were not willing to give up a lot of the power they had, The final scope of the project was very, very small. It was farmed for what was wanted. So you also have to be aware that sometimes even if you have a solution, it might not be viable because of political constraints, not just technological constraints. The other experience we look a lot at is the cybersyn experience of the Allende government. It was in Chile, there was an attempt to plan the economy following cybernetic process. It was an attempt to avoid the rigidity, to overcome these institutional blockades. At the same time, prevent it from degenerating into a market economy. Was extremely limited technologically. They kind of showed what you could do with more than what I have here, less than what I have here on my smartphone. But unfortunately, there was another problem, which was Pinochet's coup and the CIA and that kind of stuff, which prevented them from going further. But it was a very interesting thing. There's also issues with getting the workers to adopt the technology. A lot of them saw it as something brought from the outside, and it would take some time to convince them that this was actually not another miracle solution for them, which usually happens if you don't have enough support on the shop floor. So to finish off, this is what we currently research at CibCom. We look at three problems. We look at the problem of large-scale democracy. How do you make decisions that truly represent the interests of the majority? How do you introduce ecological limits into accounts in plans? And also feminism and gender issues. How do we avoid reproducing institutions that are sexist, and how do we help liberate half of humanity? So very briefly, for large-scale democracy, our pillar is what we call democratic republicanism, which I know Tim might talk a bit about later. And it's basically, we don't only need to take control of the economy, we need to abolish inequality. And without democracy, this is not possible. So how do we build a political framework based on the universality of collective decisions that allows us to do this? So one of the things we think about a lot is, is it desirable to have sortition? Is it desirable to have referenda? What is it desirable to have referenda for? Information should be public as much as possible because we need to replace the market feedback with something that works for everyone. Like I say, this is one of the usual objections to economic planning. How do you do this? This is something we spend a lot of time researching, translating articles, talking to people around the world, and thinking about these issues. The second piece is ecological issues. Like capitalism rationalizes interaction of man with nature through the laws of the market. How much is oil worth? Oil is worth how much the Saudis decide it's worth. How much is lithium worth? It's not based on somehow how the cost of producing lithium. It's just based on other things, right? When you go to the market and buy something, ecological issues are normally out of the picture. If they were in, we wouldn't be in climate change, right? So for planning to help, it must be adequate to close this fracture. And the USSR, even if it was better than other countries, was very far from perfect. And there's problems. CO2 is easy to account for. We can have the Paris Protocol, 400 particles per million. But how are you going to plan an agroecological cycle? You have, I think, in the Netherlands, all these farmers also protesting against the new regulations from the EU against fertilizers. But fertilizers are really damaging, right? So how do you put all of this together? How do you give natural cycles adequate weight beyond just a democratic account? You also need a lot of technical issues here. And finally, one thing we propose is we look at is reproductive work. And in many ways, cities are designed so the reproductive work is individual. We all cook at home, we all clean our homes. It's very inefficient and it's mainly feminized. So a planned economy can give rise to new ways of organizing the domestic and socializing care. We recently published an article about this in English in Cosmo magazine. You're interested in knowing more. And of course, feminism is an extremely wide question, project, problem. And this is not the solution to everything. But on the other hand, if you don't look at these things, and these are things we can look at from the economic issue, this is something where we think we can give, at least, or propose something that is useful. And we're trying to think about how do you design an urban commune, how do you socialize reproductive work, how do you socialize care work, so that this doesn't fall on the hands of usually the people it falls on. So a lot of bibliography. I'll give the slides later. And like I said, this is a collective that works in many lines of research. This is just a glimpse of what we work on. Well, this is generally in the Spanish. In English, it makes less sense because we're mainly a Spanish-speaking collective, but we do have an international section. If you're interested in more, well, this is a website, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, email, etc.